Today we're going to be talking to a former Navy SEAL who knows everything about mental toughness and physical toughness. His name is Mark Devine, and he joins us now from Encinitas in California. Mark, how are you, sir? Great to have you here.
Yeah, James, great to be here. Thanks for having me. Let's get tough.
Are you tough, Mark? Are you tough? I'm sure you are if you're a former Navy SEAL.
I can't tell you. If I told you, I'd have to kill you. So.
There you go. It's funny, I've been doing this show now for about a year, and people who message in and ask advice, a lot of times they blame things on circumstances. Not all of them, but some people. When was the kind of change in mindset for you when you realized that you controlled your thoughts, you controlled your destiny, that you weren't a victim of circumstance, so that you can make your own way in the world? Just before we get into your story a little bit more.
Sure. Well, it kind of ties to my story a little bit, but I started to really take control, James, through a martial art when we actually had to, it wasn't the fighting that really taught me. It was the non-fighting stuff we did. It was sitting in silence. It was the Zen, it was the bench work. And that's when I had to face my own mind and what the heck was going on in that mind, and look at, some of the ugly things that had gotten me into, and it was a powerful lesson for me. And I was 21 years old, and that time was about a 4-year period. I was in Manhattan. I was getting my MBA at New York University. I was working in a career path, which I was completely unsuited for, as a CPA. And it was that time sitting on a bench and just literally beginning to pay attention to the inner workings of that mysterious thing we call our minds, that I first learned how to take control. And you're right. Once I learned how to take control, then everything just started lining up. There's a lot of little steps in between that happened, and a lot of hard work, of course. But, I realized that it really was up to me. And,
yeah, absolutely. And so you were an accountant in New York City, that's right. And you were mid-20s, and then
right.
How did you come up with this idea? Is like, I'm going to go and be a Navy SEAL. Like, was there a moment? Was it a phase of your life? Was it one incident? Like, what was the catalyst?
Well, it was more of a unfolding of a sense of destiny. Again, through the silence practice, I was very fortunate to be part of a martial art where the Grand Master was truly interested in developing human beings. And the fighting part was interesting. He was actually he's a world champion, and he left a very brutal fighting art called Kokenshai that he was sent to the United States to be the head of, and he left it, right, at great risk to his reputation and his own life. Actually, he was shot as a result of it. He survived his injuries and started this other program. And it's just one of those things, where the student is ready, the teacher appears, and he appeared in my life at exactly the right moment. And so I trained directly with him. And what was happening is, I would kind of blindly follow this path. My parents were, hoping that I was going to come back to the family business. I was groomed to be a professional, white collar kind of guy. I went to Colgate University. All my peers, either went into law or business or medicine. It was the standard American kind of dream. And when you're really just busy and just kind of barreling along, like you do. When I was in my early 20s, I was working full time. I was going to night school to get my MBA. I was studying for the CPA exam, still trying to have a social life and, chasing women and all that, of course. And, you don't ever take any time to ask the right questions.
Right.
And so when I was able to, when Nakamura was his name, when he forced me to just slow down, sit down and shut the F up, and then just pay attention to what's going on inside. And then there's layers upon layers and upon layers. And then what started to come up when I started to penetrate some of those deeper layers was that, man, I was in the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the time that mattered the most, which is right here, right now, which is the only time we have, right?
Right.
And so I started then to ask questions, well, if not that, then what, right? And it's interesting, James, when you start asking yourself questions, well, eventually you're going to come up with answers, right? It may take some time, but most people don't learn how to ask questions. Part of being in control of your life is to know what questions to ask, and then being courageous enough to explore the answers, especially if you don't like what you're getting. And I didn't like the answers I was getting. I didn't have a good reason for being in Manhattan besides the money. I really was being driven by the value system of that, 1980s mindset, which really hasn't changed at all, right, in 30 years, which was all about career status, the degrees, the money, power. And what I found out sitting on the bench was none of that mattered really to me. Ultimately, at a deep level, what mattered to me was being a good person, being in service to other people, being a leader. I loved adventure. I didn't like the fact that here I was, in a suit for 12 hours a day, with no ethic around training my body, mind, except for this little martial arts program I was in. And I just saw all my peers in this like slow decline already in the mid, even in our mid 20s. And I saw the folks who were in their 40s looking like they were 70. And I said, I just don't want to participate in this. So, it wasn't a flash of inspiration. I did have one of those when I specifically decided to go to the SEAL teams, but the run up to that was this general sense of I'm misfit, I'm misaligned, I'm not in the right place at the right time. So what is it that I'm meant to be doing? What is my purpose? What is my passion? And what are my principles? And then once I was able to start to answer those, then it led me to say, okay, if that's what I am, if that's who I am, and if that's why I'm here on this planet, then what can I do about it? How can I serve meaningfully? And then that starts to look like a career, right? Or a structural display of that purpose. And that for me was the SEAL teams.
So just to be clear, because I want to make sure we ask ourselves the right questions. I was a journalist for many years. So from right when I was 17 years old, when I became a first year cadet at a Rupert Murdoch broadsheet newspaper, my job was to ask people the right questions that would extract the right kind of answer that I could then go away and write a story. So I feel very blessed that I was able to ask, become a master questioner, if you like.
Yeah, that's a great skill.
Yeah. So what, if you had to sum it up into like 3, 4, 5 questions that the listener or the viewer right now should ask himself or herself to try and get that clarity about what they should be doing, what are the absolute must questions they must ask themselves?
Well, I like this, everyone's going to be a little bit different and you can approach this from a few different angles. But for me, I think I like to ask, what is it that makes your hair on fire? What fires you up with such passion that you would just, you would pay people to do it, right? Instead of, having to get paid to do it. I mean, for me, I was passionate about training. I was passionate about adventure. I was passionate about travel. And those things were really important to me, but I wasn't doing any of them because I was following this job path that required me to be in a suit and tie and in this, in this chair. So that's really important. It's like, what are you passionate about? And are you living your passion? Or are you trying, at least trying to align with that passion? Mm-hmm. And then I think it's really important to ask, what are you principled about? Right? How many people can clearly articulate where they stand based upon a very solid foundation of values or principles? And those principles then become your guardrail or your handrail, right? Mm-hmm. So when things get confusing, you can say, well, you know what? My principle is, right, to live the healthiest version of myself. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do that by training every day, eating really well, thinking positively, right? And so if I'm now in a situation where I'm not able to do those things or I continually get pulled off track, then you have to ask yourself, am I living in alignment with that principle? And if you're not, then bad things happen, right?
Yeah.
Bad things happen. So that's the second question. And these are really foundational, right?
Yeah.
And then the third is, what's my vision for why God, as you understand him, placed me here on this planet? What's my purpose? How can I serve humanity in a way that is deeply meaningful to me? So again, back to my example of CPA, Navy SEAL, serving humanity as a CPA just was a big dull thud to me, right? There was nothing there. But serving humanity as a warrior and a leader was deeply inspiring to me. And it felt true. It felt right. It felt like that was who I was. And that's what was coming up to me through the silence when I was asking those questions. Who am I? What am I meant to do? Why am I here? And then ultimately what that comes out of all that is what I call your stand. And the stand is, this is the ground I'm standing on, which means we've got to start living in alignment with that. Right. Those are the things that define who I am. and I'm not living in alignment with it, then what the F over.
So let's just go over that. So what fires you up with such passion that you would pay people to do it? Are you trying to align with that passion? Right. Next thing is, what are you principled about? What do you stand for? What are your values? What are your principles?
Right.
Are you living in alignment with those principles?
Correct.
And then what is your vision? Or ask yourself the question, what is my vision for why God placed me here, for why I am here? What is my purpose? How can I serve humanity in a way that is deeply meaningful for me? So they are powerful questions. You ask yourself the right questions, you're going to get the right answers. Here's the other thing that I would say too, Mark. What's worked for me a lot of times when I've been stuck, and just to the viewer and listener, we're going to move on to the Navy SEAL part of this in a second. We kind of got off a little bit track, but it's important because you can have all the tools in the tool belt, but if you don't know what your purpose is or you don't know what you should be doing, you will just go down a rabbit hole and you will waste years of your life.
But the key, though, James, is every Navy SEAL had to answer these questions, or he would never have ever made it through the first 2 weeks of training.
Right.
He had to be very clear about why he was there, what his values were, and and he had to be deeply passionate about everything that we were doing: running, swimming, being a good teammate,
right,
shooting guns, all that kind of stuff. What
I would say, Mark, has worked for me, and some people criticize this because it focuses on what they perceive to be the negative. But what I like to do is I think about what I don't want, and I focus on what where I don't want to live. I focus on who I don't want to hang out with.
That's terrific, yeah.
And I think about who I don't want to be and what I don't want to stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And when I figure those things out, because a lot of people are saying, a lot of the advice people get is, "I'll just do what you're passionate about," or "just figure out what you want." Well, but then people go, "I don't know what I want. I kind of like this. I like this. I like a lot of things, but I'm not. Sure. It's not absolutely clear what I'm destined to do because I like lots of things. What's wrong with liking lots of things?"
Right.
So what worked for me is I write down on a piece of paper everything that I don't want. I don't want to live here. I don't want to be around this type of people. I don't want to live this kind of life. Maybe it's I don't want to be single. Maybe it's I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. Maybe it's I don't want to be drinking alcohol. I stopped drinking alcohol 5.5 years ago and created a 30-day no alcohol challenge. I left Los Angeles at one point. I'm now back in Los Angeles, but I remember I left Los Angeles around 2009 and went off to Buenos Aires, Argentina for 6 months because I was fed up living in Los Angeles. I didn't like the friends that I had in my life. I didn't like the way I was thinking. I was jealous of other people's success. I was envious. I was just a crappy person in my mind.
Right.
And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what the alternative was. All I just knew was that I didn't want what I had.
Yeah.
And so I just went bang and I left and I got out of there to go and reset my mind. And then when I came back, it became a lot easier to focus and get clarity on what it is that I did want. So if asking yourself the question, what do I want to do? What am I passionate? If the answers aren't coming because you don't know, that's okay. It's okay because for some people, it doesn't come easily. Right. But ask yourself what you don't want, and then what you do want comes to the forefront a lot more.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's the law of contrast. And I think that, the questions start out with a positive, but getting to the answer, it's a multi-layering process. And I think that what you're alluding to is just one way, the mind works. It needs to contrast itself against something to gain clarity on what it can't conceive of. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right? So unless you have a clear vision of what that is, you don't really know what it is until you can contrast with what it isn't.
Correct.
And I think that's a terrific way. So then, cognizing what it isn't then starts to narrow the range of possibilities about what it would or could be. And that's when you then use your creative imagination to start to imagine yourself in those scenarios. And so I went through that same process. I had I don't want this. It doesn't look good. Family business, X, CPA, cross that out, investment banker, still thinking in terms of careers when I was 21, as opposed to more like archetypes or, whatnot. And once I was eliminating more and more things from the list, but what's stayed on the list as possibilities were these kind of vague adventure, leadership, warrior type of things. And so then I said, okay, well, if those are out and this potential field of things are in, then I called it wearing the coat. I said, well, let me just imagine myself in a future state, doing some things that I can conceive that share the characteristics of things that I'm passionate about, principled about, and I perceive to be in alignment with my purpose to be a warrior and a leader. And so I thought about military options, obviously, but that wasn't it. I thought about going to Japan and like just really immersing myself into the martial arts. I thought about going out on an oil rig and working as a roughneck. I thought about flying jets for the Marine Corps. And one day I was stumbling home from work, and I passed the Navy recruiter's office, and I saw the poster for the Navy SEALs, and the title was "Be Someone Special." And it had guys jumping out of airplanes and kind of locking out of submarines and coming ashore in small boats and in a sniper hide site. And I was like, boom, that was a crystallizing moment for me, because
wow.
I had eliminated all this stuff. I was very clearly looking for something that would kind of fit this new version of myself that was being constructed in my mind using my creative imagination. And that imagery, which I had never seen before, because back in '87, we didn't have a lot of information on the SEALs. There weren't movies. There were a couple of books from Vietnam, but not much. Wasn't much imagery. It's not like the guys playing the first-person shooter games, pretend that they're Navy SEALs all the time. And so that was a crystallizing moment, because I was like, boom, that's it. Now I had the imagery, and I could. And when I sat with that back on the bench, when Nakamura put me back on the bench, and I was sitting there meditating about it, it just felt right. I mean, that's where the intuition comes up. It's like, boom, everything felt right. I got this tug, almost like drawing me toward it. And so this is how your mind. You got to use your rational mind to eliminate options and to conceive of other options. And then you use your imagination or your visual mind to get really clear about that vision. And then you use your intuitive mind to check whether it's the right path or not. I mean, ultimately that's about taking control, but it's an iterative process.
Mark, you created this, you went off and you were a Navy SEAL. Obviously you toughened up as what this episode is what we're talking about here. You must have gone through some, what society likes to call hell, gone to hell and back mentally and physically. And then you created this rugged training regimen that's spread out over 3 days for those willing to put themselves through pain. So people come in there and they pay you money and they give you effort, and you in return promise them a painful, supremely difficult, but ultimately transformative experience. So can you tell us just a little bit about what the pain and suffering is, and what are the benefits of, purposely saying, smash me, put me through pain, put me through misery, put me through mental and physical hell and back?
The human condition is that we grow through challenge. And when we shy or shirk from challenge, we shrink. I don't mean we physically shrink. I mean, which we do actually, but I mean, we feel a sense of diminishment of our spirit. I don't know how else to describe it. We get weak. If we don't challenge ourselves in big form and consistently, then we get weaker and weaker until we quite literally are afraid to take on challenge. I learned this in the SEALs. We challenge ourselves every single day to improve ourselves, to be our best. We challenge ourselves physically. We challenge ourselves mentally. We challenge ourselves emotionally. We challenge ourselves, to the point of not being certain we were going to survive certain evolutions and certain things. And it led to this unbelievable growth. So the program that you're alluding to, I call Kokoro Camp. And Kokoro is a Japanese word that means to merge your heart and your mind into your actions. When you can do that, you get wisdom, right? Your thinking mind is clever, but it leads to problems. We can't really trust it. Your heart is, where you're going to be able to be connecting with other human beings and connecting maybe with a much broader kind of sense of what it means to be human. But the heart without a mind is difficult to get anything done. And so when you can merge the two and act from that center, it's powerful. So how do you get there, though? Right? How do you get there? It's through challenging. It's like through deeply challenging circumstances. So a good example of an unstructured challenge is having to survive cancer. Now, we don't want that of anyone, but we all know people who have been through like really intense things, either themselves or a close family member, and they're transformed through the process. They are different people at the other end of it, and they live their lives radically different because they've had that wake up call. It's like they're twice born. You know what I mean? And so my philosophy, and I learned this in the SEALs Hell Week, which is 6 days nonstop training, 130 or 40 hours of nonstop training. We get 4 hours of sleep once during the week. It's not every night, but once. And that incredible, we call it crucible experience, takes you so far into territory that you didn't even know you had, again, mentally, physically, emotionally, intuitionally, and spiritually, and so deeply into a connection with your teammates, because you just can't do that alone. You cannot survive that event alone. That's why most people quit. They think, I got to go in there to prove how tough I am. And the reality is nobody is tough alone, right? In those intense situations, you're tough when you are able to provide support to a teammate,
right,
and are able to receive support from a teammate.
Right.
And that process develops this notion of kokoro or kokoro spirit, right?
Right.
And you come out of it with this concept that you're capable of, I say 20x, 20 times more than you previously thought you were. And my students typically, like even Ben Greenfield, who we talked about earlier, typically will say that there's life kind of before Kokoro Camp and life after, because you just have this sense that anything that you approach that is a little bit hard, and you got to face it, most of what we do in the Western world is just a little bit hard. It's nothing compared to, what, some people in this world are experiencing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Right? We live rather comfortable existences.
Yes.
So you are capable of just so much more. You've proven it to yourself, and we give them the tools to control their body, their mind, their emotions, and to make better decisions when the stress is poured on, which it is.
There's a book which I've spoken about a lot called The Happiness Hypothesis by a New York professor called Jonathan Haidt. And he says in that book, based on his studies and all the scientific studies over time, is that human beings need to experience real trauma at least once in their life in order to be truly successful. Not everyone, but one of the traits of successful people is that they've experienced, or happy people, they've experienced trauma in their life, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether it's experiencing cancer, maybe it's being wiped out financially, whatever it is that it gives you that trauma in your life. Those people who've experienced that and gone through that, when they come out the other side, they have a new zest for life. They have motivation. They have drive.
Right.
A colleague of mine had cancer and fought cancer for 18 months, and he's got scars all over his neck from his treatment. And he was telling me about his chemotherapy, and he's telling me about his life pre-cancer and post-cancer. He is just such a happy person now. He just loves everything and appreciates everything about life. He doesn't bitch. He doesn't moan. He doesn't complain because he's gone through hell. He's gone through where he thought he was going to die, and he went to chemotherapy and all the sickness involved with that. And so he comes out and he just appreciates everything, and he's driven and he's motivated.
Right.
So do you think that in order for human beings to truly succeed, whether it's happiness or business prowess or relationships, would you agree that we need to put ourselves under some kind of trauma? If the trauma doesn't accidentally or just circumstantially happen to us, should we force ourselves into that situation so we can come out the other side more motivated to succeed?
Well, I think so. In the past, it was happening naturally to human beings, right? Even I'm 51 years old. Even when I was a kid, we were experiencing far more challenging things than most kids today, right? And we learned to enjoy it. We learned to do what I call embrace the suck, and we understood the benefits, the peace of mind, the intense feeling of connection when you're just, completely, utterly exhausted after, doing a 25-mile, like almost run pace ruck with 60 pounds on your back. And, everything is just completely cleared out of your body and your mind. And it's like a spiritual experience, right? You have a peak experience through those challenging things. baling hay all day long and, having to, pitch these 70-pound bales of hay, and you're just utterly exhausted. You're like falling down exhausted, but you just keep going, and you just have this like these breakthroughs, and they call them second, third, and fourth wins, and to the point where all of a sudden you're just like, I could do this forever, right? And it feels so good. And so those are the type of, I have a chapter in my book, The Way of the Seal. It's like, you bring the challenge to you, or go to the challenge, or else the challenge will come to you, is the concept. So the principle is, if you seek out challenges that are going to help you grow and unlock, areas of and insights, and are going to allow you to kind of burn off karma, to use the Eastern, context of law of cause and effect, then those other challenges that a lot of people would consider to be trauma or traumatic, they tend to avoid you, right? And I think it truly is a part of the human condition that we're all going to experience some sort of challenge like that trauma. I mean, death being the ultimate, the ultimate stopping point. But if we can set up our lives so that we're always going to the challenge and using those challenges to develop our character, to grow, to accelerate learning, to unlock our potential, and to find those places where we're hiding from ourselves, right? To find our shadows, shed light on those shadows. It's like your own personal therapy program.
Right.
And, when people go through Kokoro camp and it's 50 hours of nonstop training, I mean, it's like you're packing in years of development into that 50 hours. And you've got a group of Navy SEALs who are there, who are like the world's leading experts at probing for weakness, and then helping you put some cement over it and shoring it up, and then allowing you to kind of come through that fire and understand yourself better, basically.
James Swanwick here. Just a quick interruption to share some of the results that folks have been getting inside of our 90-day stop drinking process as it relates to profession, career, and wealth creation. This is Jeff Salzburn from Minnesota, who says, I did an additional deal this month. This is Gaetano from Massachusetts. I've increased revenue. Susie Vaughan says, I've generated 20% more leads. Joe Worley from Michigan says, I got a promotion. Tim Steele from Pennsylvania says, I've generated more clients and income. And Russell from Australia says, I've saved thousands. So if progressing in your career, profession, business, growing your wealth is a motivation for you to stop drinking, then I invite you to go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/Project 90. Check out the details about Project 90 and how we may be able to support you to stop drinking for at least 90 days through our process and really drive your professional life. Okay, back to the show.
So to the viewer or listener who thinks that they probably need toughening up, okay, we'll talk about, what you go through at SEALFIT, but let's just say he or she's not going to do SEALFIT for whatever reason, okay? What are some daily practices that he or she can incorporate into their own life to quote unquote toughen the F up?
That's such a great question, because you alluded to something which is really important. A lot of people need to understand this, is that the training that I'm alluding to in SEALFIT is the fast track, right? But you don't need to put yourself through 50 hours of nonstop training. You don't need to become a Navy SEAL. It just accelerates things, because it takes a hell of a lot of courage, and it takes everything we've been talking about. You got to have a clear why. You got to be a great teammate. You got to be a really emotionally developed person to even get through those types of challenges. So, there's a preparatory phase to many of these challenges. And that preparatory phase is basically daily training and practice. So let me use the yoga model, for example. Yoga is the science of basically human development. It's been around for probably 10 or 20,000 years, if you want to be honest about it. And the notion of tapas, right? Every day you do the work to burn off lethargy, to burn off emotional blockages, to basically burn off maybe karma again from that system. And that daily work required some functional movement in the context of modern day. That could be CrossFit, it could be a yoga class, poses. It could be a brisk hike. So that functional movement was meant to help make your body healthy and a fit vehicle for your whole mind to be able to develop. It also required examination of your life and alignment with principles, like we talked at the beginning of this call, powerful principles, and an understanding of powerful principles, like universal principles, how to be a good person, how to live with non-attachment, how to be able to forgive people and to forgive yourself, how to be non-violent and positive, right, with the way you use your mind. So that was a part of yoga. And then the next was developing deep physiological control. We use the breath, and this is one of the daily practices. The breath is your center post. The breath is your tool for managing your physiological body and managing and mitigating the stress response. Whether that stress is, stress of not having a meal for the day, or getting cut off on the road, or having to deal with heavy traffic, or being late for work, that kind of stuff. And then the breath becomes the link to the next stage of development, which is concentration, beginning to take control of the rational mind and be able to concentrate on one thing. And so when you begin to take control of the mind, and so you can concentrate deeper and deeper and deeper, then what happens is all the clutter and all the loops, you're able to shut them down.
Right.
And you're able to focus. And so we can do that through the breath. And there's other methods for concentration. And then we move on and begin to develop greater awareness. And so we start to begin, instead of concentrating, let's say I'm going to concentrate on this coffee cup and know everything about this coffee cup, I turn the flashlight inward and I begin to concentrate with awareness on the patterns that are, guiding my life. Right? And so that's where we start to get really, and those questions we asked at the beginning start to get really interesting, because now we're really able to penetrate most deeply and start to understand our human nature. And by understanding our human nature, we can understand the human nature of other people.
Right.
And so this is a process. So what I teach in my academies and my Unbeatable Mind program is a daily series of spot drills and a couple rituals. I have a morning ritual, an evening ritual, a pre-workout and a post-workout ritual, and then I have some spot drills. And they kind of develop this ability to become really, really focused, to get out of that kind of ego mind and constantly merge and obsess with everything that's going on around you, to really start to create some separation between the thinking mind and what I call your witnessing mind, and to be able to start making really much better decisions where you are writing the script moment to moment of your life. And it's really empowering, because if you felt like you were buffeted by circumstances, or you were reacting to other people in your life, and you're constantly being jerked around like that, and you feel out of control. Well, within like 30 days of my training, people say they feel like they're completely back into control. So I have a very simple breathing exercise I call box breathing. Ask them to do it in the morning and the evening, and then during the day a couple times. And you only need 5 minutes, but the key is daily consistent effort.
Okay.
Right? And then box breathing will get the physiology and get them back under control with their body. Their emotions start to become much more manageable, and their mind starts to get clear. And then we go from there into functional fitness, some concentration training, some visualization training, and stuff like that.
Just as we head on the homeward stretch here, Mark, can you just quickly give us an overview of your normal day, a normal weekday for you? What time do you wake up? What do you do? When do you have breakfast? What do you have for breakfast? What do you do mid-morning? What do you do for lunch? What do you eat? When do you exercise? Who do you talk to? What mental exercises or physical exercises do you do? Right through until your head hits the pillow, and nightly routine. So what is a traditional day in the life of former Navy SEAL Mark Devine?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to be able to tell you that I'm jumping out of airplanes and knocking down the doors right now, because I'm sure everyone would love to know what a day in a Navy SEAL's life. And I could tell you that, but I have been retired now for 3 years. So most of my time is spent at my SEAL Fit headquarters in Encinitas, where we got a 20,000 square foot facility, and where myself and some of my coaches, although I have a lot of coaches who are kind of around the country, but I have a bunch here who are local and who come train with us every day. So I will wake up typically at 5:30 ish, Don't usually use an alarm. It's just kind of generally when I wake up. And I have a morning ritual I just alluded to a little while ago. First thing I do is have a fresh glass of water, right? And with that glass of water, I will express some gratitude, and then I begin what I call a really brief gratitude practice where it's a way for me to start the day with a really positive attitude in a state of positivity. So gratitude, you can't get much more positive than that. So in fresh water, right, you got a lot of toxins, a lot of crud that builds up in the evening. It's like really good to kind of clear your whole system, right? Boot it up. And then I go into about a 5-minute, sometimes longer, maybe 10 or 15-minute breathing practice, right? And the breathing practice is, like I said, it's really about kind of harnessing the energy, clearing the mind. And I use a pattern that is I change it up a little bit depending upon what I'm looking for, but the breathing practice will have a ratio with holds and suspensions, right? And when I teach the Mark 1 motto version, I teach is just called box breathing. And I say, okay, start with the 4-count inhale, do a 4-count hold, 4-count exhale, 4-count hold, do that for 5 minutes, and then begin to layer some positive statements into it. So you might do something like inhale to 4-count, hold, and then mine from Navy SEAL training was feeling good, I'm looking good, ought to be in Hollywood. Exhale,
I like that.
Exhale, hold, and do that for about 5 rounds. And then you can change it up and add a different statement, but it's like your mantra. And so as you can see, what's happening, this box breathing starts out as a physiological practice, right? Because I'm breathing through the nose. Every time I breathe through the nose, and we don't have time to get into all the details, but I'm triggering my parasympathetic nervous system. I'm calming my body down. And then because it's also a concentration practice, because I'm sitting there, that's the only thing I'm doing is thinking about that pattern and, high quality. And if my mind wanders, I catch it and come back. It's just like meditation. So my mind is starting to, get focused. And then I will, at the end of that, I will add a visualization. And the visualization is to basically, once I get up off that bench and walk out into my life, what does my day look like? Right. So in the SEALs, we call that dirt diving. We dirt dive a mission. I dirt dive the mission of having an excellent day. And so I see myself, interacting with my team, doing my training. If I've got some important meetings, or if I'm giving a speech or podcast, I see myself having a great and very successful interactions there, being safe, right? Not getting injured in my training, being authentic with my teammates, being authentic with my family, spending quality time with my son. And I visualize myself all the way up to the end of the day. Right? And I call that winning in your mind. And so I set the conditions to win in my mind by seeing that day before I even step foot into it. Right. And then assuming there's 2 versions of this. One is I'm not going in to train right away. And so if I'm not going in to train right away, then I'll do my yoga practice, right? Which every day is going to be a little bit different depending on how much time I have and what my body needs. And I let my body kind of guide that. And that could even include, like a mini CrossFit WOD or some fight moves, some combat conditioning. And that's what I call warrior yoga. And that's actually my next book. I'm just finishing up. It's this warrior yoga practice that we've been developing with the SEAL candidates. And then when I'm done with that, I will check in with my personal ethos. And back to those questions, I have answers to those questions written in my, actually it's in my iPhone, which is such a handy little device. Mm-hmm. And so I'll go in there and I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, I'll have a statement, about my vision for my life. So I'll just read it and I'll reflect upon it. A statement for my, my mission, right, in life. I have all my principles written out and how I'm going to move closer to living that principle today. And I'll just read through all this. And I call that aligning with my ethos, right? To make sure that I'm, because sometimes what comes out of this, James, is I've looked at my schedule and all of a sudden I see that there's something on my schedule, which I'm like, you know what? That's not going to really get me closer to my ethos, right? Or to my alignment with this stuff. I mean, it could take me off track. And so it's a final opportunity to just, send a note to somebody and say, you know what, take this off my calendar, or sorry, something's come up. I really can't do this today. Right. Right. And so one of our principles is simplicity. Yes. And so when you're aligned, when you're deeply aligned with your purpose and something you're passionate about, then it gets much easier to say no to all these commitments that tend to creep up on us.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's, I haven't even left the door, left the room yet.
Yeah.
But all
So
this
far,
stuff,
so good. So far, so good. So
yeah.
what are you eating any food at this point, Mark?
Okay. So the next thing, and sometimes I'll do this before the movement, depending if I'm not doing the movement, I'm usually going in to train at the training center. I'll have a cup of bulletproof coffee, which I mean, not the actual, I just have a cup of coffee and I put some oil and butter in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
grass-fed butter, right?
Yes, exactly. Grass-fed Irish butter. And that sustains me. And then, if I'm not taking my son to school, then I'm say goodbye to him and I'm off to the training center, which is about 8 minutes from my home. Right. And then the first, major action of my day is to continue my training. And that's when I get into my SEAL Fit workout. And so that's going to be, from roughly from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. I'm going to be doing a workout that includes strength and stamina development, work capacity development, right, which is building my metabolic engine, durability training, and maybe some endurance depending upon what day it is. And so those are all, I follow the SEAL Fit protocol, and it's just a very, very effective training, right? It's got a lot of barbell work, it's functional, very effective. So then I do, I usually have, things like this, a podcast or a meeting or, some sort of management thing, or I'm preparing for a speech, or I'm doing whatever. I work my schedule around projects and things that are really aligned with what I have the ability to make a maximum contribution and that are aligned with my unique competencies and my unique talents, right? I try really hard not to get bogged down in things that I shouldn't really be doing, right, in my work. And so I tend to be really focused on things I'm already good at and I'm going to succeed at a high level. And then I hire people or outsource those other things. So that keeps me motivated throughout the day because I'm going from project to task or something that I know is going to move the dial, right? Like I know talking to you is something that's going to be, rewarding and very enjoyable. We're going to make new connections and it's going to move the dial, right? For both of us, even if it's just one little click. And so it's easy to get very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then during the day, largely that goes to the day. I'll have my first meal. I'm about ready to think, and that's about time for it right now, around 10:30 to 11. And it typically is large breakfast, right? And so I think breakfast is such a great meal because, you can get a really good paleo-ish meal, lots of fat with, great omelet, some cottage cheese, some bacon, which is the duct tape of food. And you get the quality and quantity of fat you need.
Yes.
And protein, and then the carbs, fruit, yes. Some sort of vegetables in the omelet and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
So try to avoid eating bread and pasta. I try to stick to the paleo, even though I'm more of an 80-20 rule because, we train so hard, we burn so many calories that strict paleo doesn't work for us.
Right.
With SEAL Fit. But that's, that now I've had my butter and MCT oil in the morning and I've trained, I've done a bone crushing workout and that sustained me, right? Because I'm slightly ketogenic. And then I have that large breakfast and then that carries me through to dinner, basically. Sometimes I might have a light snack in the mid-afternoon, but usually So that's kind of my food, my fueling plan.
Yeah.
I hydrate a lot with fresh water. And then typically I'll have a second cup of coffee. So I try not to do more than 2 cups of coffee, but I'll have the small cup of bulletproof in the morning, which is mostly about getting the oil and butter in. And then I'll have a second cup of coffee later on, maybe around 11 o'clock or so. So I don't take lunch. I'm not the kind of guy who goes and has a sit-down lunch, but I try to work through lunch or I'll do another training session. If I do another training session, it's going to be a soft training session, meaning it's going to be like I'm just going to go do a Tai Chi form or I'll do some yoga and some more breathing.
Okay.
I usually do those kind of as spot drills if I get done with a project, let's say I'm working on some writing project, say I write, spend a couple hours writing a chapter of a book or a blog and I'm like, okay, done. I'll go down we have a little yoga room here at our training center. I call it the Mind Gym, just kind of pop in there, throw my mat down, do 20 minutes of movement, breathing, and visualization. There's a spot drill, right? You don't need to go to a yoga class and make it a big ordeal. It's right wherever you are. There's your training tool, right?
Right.
It's you and a space about the size of your body laying down. That's all you need, And so, and then I typically will head home, 5 or 6. Tonight I've got a self-defense program, so I'm going to jump into that at 5 to 6:30. So do some fighting. I'm home by 6:45. Have dinner with my family, my wife and my son, sometimes my stepdaughter. After that, then like to go read a book for a while. A lot of times, a few times a week, my wife and I will download a movie or a TV show or something like that and just kind of hang out and watch it. But we don't watch TV per se. We don't have cable or anything like that. The only thing we have is Amazon and Netflix, and we'll watch something on that. Usually in bed by 10:30 or so.
Okay. So you're getting a good 7 hours sleep.
Yeah, 7 hours sleep. We're really big on sleep. I try not to be up past 11. Sometimes on the weekend, that gets blown out if we're doing some socializing. But sleep's super critical. So we likely try to follow. Again, I'm not a purist on a lot of the stuff like Ben is or something. But I do black out my room, and I use blue light blocking glasses when I watch.
Yeah, I do those as well. Actually, I'm actually coming out with my own brand of those sleep glasses, those blue blocking glasses in the coming months. So I'm going to send you a gift at the end of this interview. Anyway, I'll get your details afterwards, but I'll also send you a pair of my glasses. In fact, you can see if you're watching on the video, you can see the packaging here. It's a vanity project. I'm calling them Swannwicks, my last name.
Good for you. Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah. So I'll send
really help out,
Yeah, I'll send you a pair of those when I get them in a couple of months. But yeah, go on. So you wear the blue blocking glasses.
So the last thing I do really is just I call it the evening ritual. And you can make this elaborate or really simple. And because I've been doing it for so long, I keep it really simple. I just go back to, it's kind of like a bookend. Morning ritual, you recall, had some breathing exercises. It had me checking in with my ethos. It had me doing some positivity, feeding the courage wolf. It had me doing a visualization, a dirt dive of the day, and then some movement, either my workout or some movement. The evening ritual, what I'll usually do is just choose a pose like child's pose, and I'll go into it and I'll breathe for a while. Right, it's deeply calming. Really kind of calms the nervous system down, prepares you for sleep, and the breath, like I said, does wonders. Sometimes I'll do some alternate nostril breathing, which kind of balances the hemispheres. It gets everything really grounded. And then I'll do a recapitulation visualization where I'll go back to the beginning of the day, and it's kind of like dirt diving in reverse, and just see, okay, what happened? What actually happened? I visualized it going great, but sometimes your plan doesn't survive contact with the enemy. So what actually happened? How did that podcast go? How did that meeting go? Where am I getting stuck? What are my blind spots? And I'm looking for lessons learned, right? Because I want to have everything that happened during the day be recast or to be experienced as positive by the time I go to bed.
Yes.
So that's kind of like making sure you don't drag regrets into your sleep cycle that turn into restlessness and mental or subconscious processing. So I try to do all that processing in a recapitulation visualization before I go to bed, and that whole process just takes a few minutes.
I do that myself. I have a gratitude diary. I was just looking behind me to see if I could find it to show you, but it's a gratitude diary. I wake up in the morning and it says, what are three things you're grateful for? And so I write them down. And then it says, what three things about today would make today great? And you're sort of anticipating three things that would make today great. And then at the end of the day, it asks you, what are three things that were great about today? And what you could have done better. How could you have made today better? In fact, I think is the exact questions that they ask. Now, admittedly, I'm very good at doing the morning one, but I'm actually a little slack at doing the review at the end of the night. The glucose level in my brain has been depleted sufficiently enough that I'm like, I don't want to go in there and write that down. I'm more inclined to just zone out and crawl into bed or watch 20 minutes of crappy TV at the end just to sort of switch off and get wearing my blue blocking glasses, by the way. So that for me has had a tremendous impact in my life, Mark, just from like what you're talking about, just having gratitude. And I was very resistant to it back when I heard this, I was like, I'm an Australian guy who grew up in a tough, manly culture. I'm like, gratitude, what? Well, I'm going to write down what I'm grateful for and be thankful for. This is all hokey pokey nonsense. I'm not doing this crap. Like, just get on with your life and live your life.
Right.
But I started doing it, albeit reluctantly at first. And I have to say, I've seen tremendous benefits from it. It rewires your brain.
Right.
It rewires your brain to stop looking at things like this is an obstacle, or this is what I don't have, or I'm no good, or I don't have this, or I'll never have this, to how am I going to overcome that obstacle, to wow, haven't I come so far, to I've got a solution for this, to how am I going to create the way to, you know what, I live a pretty damn good life.
Right.
And it's funny, like I've told the story a few times. My grandfather, he died earlier this year, or late last year, I should say. He was 96. He was a World War II veteran and fought for the Allies, fought for the Australian Army Corps, and fought in Tripoli and New Guinea and Africa, did 3 campaigns, and was there for the Japanese surrender. And he told me a story once about how he had to catch up on some sleep, standing up in a ditch. So he would stand up and he'd rest his forehead against this ditch here, and he would have to stand up because there were bullets going, and it was crazy. And I always say to myself, you know what, I never have to get sleep standing up in a ditch. And I just compare myself to that, and I go, wow, I am so grateful. And the one thing about my grandfather, not to make this a love fest about my grandfather. Obviously, I'm biased. He was my grandfather, right? He's my blood, but he never complained about anything. He was always so polite and gentlemanly, and always looked on the positive signs. Whenever me and my brothers were fighting as kids, as little teenage boys, he would come up and goes, "Come on, guys, come on, love your brothers. Everything's okay." And so just doing that daily practice, like you talked about in the morning and the evening, of being grateful and expressing what you're grateful for, it literally rewires your brain.
For sure.
To toughen up. To bring us back full circle to what we're talking about here, toughen up. Like, stop thinking about what you don't have. Stop complaining. Stop whining. Stop being a little bitch if you're a man. Stop being a little whining lovely lady if you're a woman. And just be grateful for what you got and make things happen.
I love that. What you're alluding to, and kind of what we've talked about this whole thing, is that most people misunderstand what toughness and grit and resiliency are. They think it has to do with how physically tough you are. And it really isn't about that. It is about your ability to be, emotionally strong and being there for other people. And when you're grateful, when you're positive, and when you realize that, hey, it could always be worse, right? It could always be worse. Mm-hmm. Then you develop humility. And so the toughest people are the most humble, like your grandfather. I mean, survived crazy stuff that most people couldn't even imagine, right? In a great war. And they just get really humble and almost soft, like the tough. Think about, if a big wind blows through, is the reed that can flex and be soft with the wind going to survive, or is it going to be the mighty oak? Well, at the end of that storm, the oak is laying on its side, and the reed is standing tall. And so flexibility and humility really, and gratitude, and having that positive attitude that, hey, it could always be worse, and we're going to find a way or make a way through the situation. That's where true toughness comes from.
Right, exactly. Well, Mark, I've really appreciated speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Mark Divine, make sure you get him at Twitter at Mark Divine, Divine. He's on Instagram at SealFit. If you'd like to go and put yourself through 3 days of hell to come out the other side, a transformed person, then go and check out his course down there. Again, go to sealfit.com. That's sealfit.com. And Mark, it's been a real inspiration and having you on the show, and I really appreciate it. I've been wanting to meet you for some time, and I'm so glad we finally got to connect. I'm actually, when we hang up here, I'm going to grab your address. I'm going to send you a gift, actually. The book I mentioned, The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, was a real game changer for me. I'd love to send you that as just as a little thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll get your details in a second. So thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, James. Hoo-yah. Take care now.
Hi there, this is James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you would leave a review. That will help us climb the rankings and get our show exposed to so many more people who could really benefit from the content. You can do that by going into Apple Podcasts, rating the show, writing a little one-sentence summary, and posting it. That would be so amazing. Thank you. Likewise, if you would like to schedule a 15-minute exploratory call and apply for our Project 90 program, then you can do so by going to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. If you'd like to get the free guide, that is the Alcohol Freedom Formula Guide, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. Our YouTube channel is at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at @James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next one.